Welcome to the Ask an Agroforester webinar series by Appalachian Sustainable Development. We're so happy you're here. My name is Emily Tordy, and my co-host Stesha Warren and I will be leading the charge. We're both agroforesters with Appalachian Sustainable Development. You'll hear me talking a little more tonight, and Stesha is behind the scenes doing Q&A and chat management, dropping some links. But first, I just want to tell you where we're headed before we get into our guest presentation tonight. So we are going to go over our welcome and webinar info, how to use the tools, and do a little intro to ASD. And then we'll have our guest presenter. That's going to be about a 15-minute presentation. And then after that, we'll get into the Q&A, which is the majority of our time this evening. The first half of the Q&A is coming from questions that we've collected ahead of time. And the second half is the live Q&A. A little bit about ASD. So Appalachian Sustainable Development's mission is to build a thriving regional food and agriculture system that creates healthy communities, respects the planet, and cultivates profitable opportunities for Appalachians. We have been around for 25 years, and the agroforestry program specifically has been around since 2010. If you are interested in any of the opportunities I'm about to show you, you can click into the programs tab and click on agroforestry, and it's all on the agroforestry page. And our website is asdevelop.org. So some of the programs we offer, firstly, we offer technical assistance in the areas of forest farming, alley cropping, and silvopasture. And that may be just a resources share, that might be pointing you in the direction of a local service provider, or scheduling a telephone call or online meeting with you to discuss your goals and how you might achieve those. And occasionally we even are able to do site visits for those folks. We also have a maple woodlot assessment program. This is a newer program, and this is aimed at folks who want to get into maple syrup production in Appalachia aren't totally sure where to start. We are also a part of the Edwards Mother Earth Foundation Train the Trainer program. You can see there are a lot of partners on this program, some really heavy hitters, awesome organizations like Interlace Commons, Savannah Institute, Cornell, Virginia Tech. And this registration at the time of recording is not yet live, but if you go to the ASD Agroforestry page and scroll down to the Train the Trainer section, you can actually click a little button that will take you to an email sign up so that you make sure that you get the first alerts about this. This program is really meant for individuals who are already in natural resources professions and those who are doing a lot of teaching or extension work, working with the public, helping folks implement these practices. And so this is aimed at providing like detailed information. We all know that there's a lot of high-level information on these subjects, forest farming, alley cropping, and silvopasture, but there's really not a lot of good detailed information for folks to be able to dig deeper and be able to give the sort of granularity that folks need to implement these programs on the ground. So that's what this is aimed at. It's going to be really awesome. There's online courses. There's also in-person workshops. You can see the dates for those here. And we're also implementing demonstration sites so that folks can go see what this looks like for real in the environment. And then we also have our Appalachian Harvest Herb Hub. And this is a really cool program. We have a facility in Duffield, Virginia, that allows herb growers to come use commercial equipment to wash, dry, sort, pack, weigh, package, all of that stuff to their herbs and get it out to buyers that they might not otherwise be able to access. We also help with the aggregation and marketing of that. We offer trainings, we offer cost share. So this is a really great program for herb growers. All right, let's get to it.
So thanks, Emily. I'm happy to be here, and this is super useful for me. Yeah, like I said, I was doing long phone calls describing everyone and saying, I wish I had pictures to show you. So this will be great to have a link on YouTube where everyone can kind of come and have a visual. So I'm going to talk about what I'm calling advanced tree protection, just because that's differentiating it from how I used to protect trees, which was not very advanced. So I'll move right through this because Emily's really wanting to spend a lot of time in Q&A, so I'll just kind of move through quickly. First, I'm going to look a little bit more in depth at me and my family's farm and kind of how we arrived at silvopasture. Then we'll do a walkthrough of how we established the trees, and then we'll go into a Q&A. So I grew up raising tobacco and cattle, and somehow I wound up an environmentalist. I developed a strong land ethic and went into an environmental field. I left that career and returned to the farm. I'm now serving as the COO, and I also started a consulting company. And my real goal, I have a lot of kind of technical interests, but the thing that really motivates me, I think, is my community. I grew up in a wonderful farming community that's really rural, but upon coming back from this career that I had, I was really dismayed to see, just not a lot going on here in Newmarket, a lot of kind of social ills and a lot of just not a lot of prosperity. And so I'm really motivated to try and figure out how we can make it easier for our young people to make a living out here, kind of in the middle of nowhere, because just the way, I won't get into, farm economics or anything like that, but I'm sure you all are very familiar with how it's been harder and harder to run a small farm. So Lake Skillet Farm is a century farm. We farm about 1,000 acres right now. We have a long history of government cost shares. I was thinking yesterday, I think probably our first cost share probably came in before it was called NRCS. I don't know. It was planting a bunch of pines back in, I don't know, about 80 years ago or something. That's important because it means that we have had investment in the farm over time. And so we have a lot of farmers that are less savvy or less interested in working with cost shares because they're kind of like, I don't want to work with the government, but that's allowed us to get our infrastructure and really improve our land. And that's been a big reason that we're at the productive capacity that we are today. Right now, we farm cattle, hogs, sheep, and poultry, and we sell all that direct to market. So why agroforestry? Our ruminant operations are pretty well dialed in. We've been doing that for long enough to really kind of know what we're doing. Our pasture quality and our grazing management are both just already excellent. I'm sure that there are some forage people, Matt Poor would go, well, now, wait a second. I'm sure that there's improvements that we can make, but that's kind of an area where we feel pretty confident in it. Now, on our shade provision, we know that we're not doing well enough there. So that's kind of an area that we can improve. We do have more heat and drought events that occur nowadays, and those are particularly hard on our non-ruminants. In this little section of the presentation, I'm going to focus on ruminants because that's what most of our land is used for and what most of my tree protection is used for. But I do have trees also for non-ruminants, and I can address that. I put a few things in blue in this presentation, and those are kind of things like, hey, Wyn's interested in this and would talk more about it, but she didn't include it in the slide. So feel free to ask me about that if you're interested. I was just trying to respect everyone's time. So another aspect of why we want shade is this: we want to be able to do our grazing management. And for those of you all who are familiar with kind of modern grazing management systems, you're trying to move your animals across the land in these rotations and only have so many days of what's called back grazing. So in some areas, if you have shade and water very far apart, it limits the amount of grazing that it limits the amount of kind of sophistication that you can use in your grazing management. So we want to go to those fields and make sure that we're adding shade where it's needed. So shade was our first objective. We had a really sharp learning curve. I always tell everyone I've been trying to grow trees in cow pasture since I was a little girl, and most of them have gotten killed. They've gotten stomped on or driven over or sprayed or chewed up or just pulled up or bush hogged or whatever. And so when I started a few years ago, a little bit more formally trying to get trees in the ground, trying a variety of different protection methods, I had really high mortality and high costs that were really kind of par for small informal beginner projects as I started looking into the case studies and speaking with folks. And I've reduced that. Really, the one big thing that I feel like I can bring to this field is this particular issue of being able to reduce that mortality and increase that cost effectiveness in a production farm. So I've reduced my mortality to under 5% and my cost to under $25 per tree. And that covers kind of the labor and maintenance for the first couple of years of the tree. So that was a 90% drop in mortality and a 50% drop in costs. Sorry. So those numbers look pretty good. I'm pretty comfortable with that, and my team is pretty comfortable with where we're at on those numbers. How did I do that? Timing planting was really important, is make your schedule work around the trees, not vice versa. Staging the equipment and careful work planning was important, but really the adequate tree protection was what was key, because these tubes that I'm going to discuss, they not only protect the tree, but they also take care of your maintenance to a great degree, and they make the tree grow better. So we've got about 450 trees in our establishment right now, about 350 on carbon credit contract. I believe that I might be the first agroforester in the US to get carbon credits. I would love to know if that's not the case. Please email me so that I'm not saying something that's false. Over a 5-year period, I expect to put about 1,800 trees in the ground. I'm growing a wide variety of species just because shade is our primary objective right now. I do have dense planting layouts with plans to thin. And as I'm getting more comfortable with getting the shade trees in the ground, I'm moving on to tree fodder, and hopefully eventually we'll be looking at some timber or non-timber products. I'm just have a lot of educating myself that I need to do before I commit to any of those things. So we're going to walk through our establishment system. I have a couple of disclaimers up front. So first of all, like I've been saying, this is just really tailored to commercial livestock production. I hope that there's some, if you aren't a commercial livestock producer, or if you're in a drier region or area with lower rainfall, low weed pressure, I hope that you can still learn something that's useful. But just so that you know, there are many different ways to establish trees, and this is just what works best for us. So let's see, this does not look like there we go. Also, I said, it's our current establishment system. It won't be the way that we always do this. I really hope that that it changes, because polywire is not meant to be used like this. And I'm hoping that the industry will provide a lower labor solution. But polywire it's my best thing to work with, and it's still cheaper and more cost effective than my alternatives, but it's still a pain in the butt. So in terms of your layout and your design, I'll go over that a little bit quickly. So I said my starting point was cattle production, and I wanted shade. You need to know what your intended outcomes are. If you're looking at shade, you don't just want to look at a map and say, where are there no trees? Specifically, you want to have a grazing management plan in place, and then watch and see where you need additional shade strategically. Now, if you don't already have your infrastructure and your grazing management in place, you're better off to focus on those than planting trees. There's a lot of new farmers that are very excited about becoming farmers, and they're very excited about agroforestry. And I'm like, look, you got to get your fences in your water first, and you got to learn about grazing management, go to a ranching for profit school, whatever it is you need to do. Those are going to be what really affects your profitability to begin with. You also want to think about your infrastructure on the site you want to plant trees. I like to be able to bush hog, so I don't want to use a super steep site. Or if I was going to use that, I'd have to plan to not bush hog. Your herd and your land, of course, are going to be important criteria. Are you doing ruminants or non-ruminants? I'm focusing, like I said, on ruminants right now, but even within the ruminants, you've got various different personalities. So if you've got yearling cows, they don't have all the wisdom of the older cows. They're going to be a lot harder to protect from than if you've got some old mamas mixed in there who are kind of calming everybody down and remembering stay away from the white tubes, right? If they're just yearlings, they may have never, seen those tubes before. And then how much weed pressure? This is a really big one for me, because most of the case studies were that I saw were from farms that were not in my climate, not in my region, didn't appear to have as high of weed pressure as we do. So we have a long growing season, lots of rainfall, and high fertility. So I can mow 4 times a year, and by the end of the year, there's burdock up over my head still. So mowing is not an option. So I'm going to look at things in terms of kind of like an archetypical grid. Now, I have plenty of plantings that aren't in straight lines if I want it to look more like aesthetic and natural, but in our major like production fields that aren't going to be used for, agritourism or potentially weddings or something in the future, I'm going to put these nice straight lines that are easy to bush hog. And I also want shade like very soon. We want shade, yesterday. And I also want shade a long, long time from now when I'm gone. So I phase the plantings with different trees of different growth rates. So what is it that I'm talking about when I talk about this tube? So it kind of looks like this over here on the right. It's a 6-foot plastic tube. Is a 7-foot fiberglass stake with a triangular section. It's very lightweight. It's wrapped, and then I wrap that tube in polywire and I connect it along the top to a charged electric fence, and the tree comes out the top. Why this particular method? Well, I've tried just about every other product on the market, and I have I've had lots and lots of trees die. My cattle will tear apart an anvil. The tube system is not only affordable, but your mortality is greatly diminished and is better for the tree. You can see here that the cattle can eat right up to the edge of it, and the tree is totally fine in there. And every time that you're reducing your mortality, you're improving your cost effectiveness, right? Because cost effectiveness has to do not just with your cost, but how many trees you're actually producing. Also, this method of the tubes, to me, just fits more of a farmer approach. A lot of the guidance that I see, including guidance from NRCS, it really seems to be coming from a landscaping point of view, like they were copying over the way that you would plant a tree for a park, or sometimes I've seen more of like forestry writing, but it doesn't, to me, fit what a rancher is going to want out in his field. It isn't like kind of cow and tractor friendly, I would say. I love that these are visible from afar, so I can just from far away see whether or not I need to go out and, if I did have any damage to a tube, I can just see it from far away. And you won't bush hog over these huge 6-foot white tubes. Also, Plantra tubes just improve the growth. I'm not a salesperson for Plantra, but I will say I love these tubes. I put them on trees now that I want to grow up tall and straight, even when I don't need to protect them, because they make the trees grow tall and straight. I had about a couple years ago, like 50 northern red oaks that started out at about 2.5 feet when I planted them in February. And by the end of the growing season, they were 5 feet tall. And the ones that were outside of the tube had only grown by 6 inches. So if I'm doing my rudimentary arithmetic right, that's like 5 times the growth just being in this tube, because I think it moderates. You can go to the Plantra website, and I'm sure they have information on all of this, but I think it kind of moderates the growing conditions. And then also the slight bit of shade, I think it simulates like a greater stem density, so that tree is just growing up and putting all of its juice into that main leader instead of its lateral shoots. So I love it. So we're going to go through how we set this up, and it'll be pretty quick, and then we'll go to questions. So you do want to, so imagine that you're putting in a row of these. You're going to connect the polywire. We're using polywire instead of just like soft wire, because soft wire is heavier, and because it's just metal, it will just sag and stretch over time. The plastic in the polywire makes it lighter and also keeps it from stretching. So that'll keep it up. It's up to about like right here on my chin or so when I'm walking like by it. And that's when I space these tubes at about 35 feet on center, or 25 to 35 feet on center. If you get to about 40, if you get beyond about 40 feet wide apart, it starts to like droop a little lower. But you do need to be able to tension that polywire on the end to something. So here Eric is putting in T-post at the end of the row, and then we will connect that to that sturdy post, because you don't just want to connect it to fiberglass, of course, because it'll just pull it over. So we're going to connect that connector on both ends to a T-post or some other sturdy connection. Here I put it to a post that has high tensile on it, and I just connected it with a little plastic insulator. Gallagher makes, I don't know if you guys can see. Can you guys see if I put something like that in there? I don't know. So they make things like that, but you can just use whatever. You just don't want your hot connection to go to something metal, obviously. Let me see if I can go back to, okay. So then you want to plant and prune your tree. I prune my trees really heavily. They look like sticks. There's only a few things that I don't prune pines. I just nip off the buds because they seem to not want to lose their foliage. But you want to get your tree in the ground, and then you want to drive the stake. And apologies to Plantra. I know there's some Plantra people on here, but y'all's post drivers are a joke. I just gave those to the kids so they could like go around and beat stuff with it. I used a T-post driver just like this. And then you're going to slip on the tube. You can label it if you want. I love using these things as little notes to myself. Before this, I was scratching on those little aluminum tags. And those just look really tasty to a steer. So they would just, if they could get a hold of them, they literally just eat the aluminum tree tag. So now I write on there, and I'll put a little note to myself if it needs any particular maintenance. Then you put on these insulated wire fasteners that they provide with the tubes. You're going to wrap around the poly wire and fasten it. You fasten it up top. You're going to top it off with one of these, I call them hair nets. That's to keep the songbirds from falling down in there, which they will do, and then they die. And then you're going to connect it and you'll energize it. So if you can see it here along the top, there's this kind of line going along the top where these are all connected. To be honest, they're not all connected. It's just the front row or two, because the cattle always enter this area from this side. So as long as they kind of remember, and there's more tubes like behind in these fields. So they're coming into here and they always know, oh yeah, stay away from the white post. And by the time you get these out here that aren't actually heat up, they leave them alone. When you're going to heat up, you can either use a solar charger or a grounded or built-in thing. So these are very expensive, but you can use them out in the middle of the field. This is what I have tried to move to, which is just running a wire alongside my permanent barbed wire fence. And then you want to test, you go out to the end of the rows and test to make sure all of your connections are good. So benefits and limitations, the good things about it are really great. That's why I'm still doing it. It's incredibly low maintenance. As you can see right here, the cattle are eating right up to this. They do the maintenance for me. The only thing I have to do is like if there's like some Johnson grass grows up inside of that, I just, once or twice a season when I'm walking through, we'll pull those out. There's very low mortality. Practically no loss of pasture. Again, you can see like they're getting to graze. It's affordable per survived tree. Again, because you've got so few trees dying. If you can be smart and keep your labor costs low. If you're not careful, you could waste a lot of time. But if you kind of think kind of military style with your planting and everything, you can do it pretty, like I said, under $25 for your first 2 years. They have good UV resistance in the short term. I believe that they're supposed to last 6 years. I haven't had one for that long. So I have, heard good reviews from other people, but, obviously they don't last forever. It improves their growth rate and form. You can see here that this little oak was doing okay, a little bit chlorotic, but he's doing okay in this arbor shield, but he's like coming out the sides. He's got all this lateral growth coming out the sides. If he was in a tube, none of these leaves would be there, and it'd just be leaves at the top, and he'd be like, 1.5 feet taller. They also don't take up much space to store, and they're relatively lightweight. So the difference between how much space I have to store for these versus those is just completely different. And this right here is just a picture of a tree that didn't get grazed around. This area was fenced off, and this is after me mowing 4 times that summer, and that's the tree bent down in the weeds. So that is why in our situation, we have to be able to graze right up to the tree. The limitations, they are tedious to install. And like I said, I hope that we can get improvements to where these are made, specifically for this purpose. The cattle do need a little bit of training to stay off the tubes, even when they are energized. My cattle are kind of crazy and they'll still knock them over. So they need to be trained. When I first bring in new cattle on them, especially if it's been a while since they've been around them, I have put these little flags on to get them to come up and nose around and get a little shock. And they learn pretty quick. They just sometimes need remembering. But again, if you're just fattening steers and you're getting a whole new group in each year, they're never going to see those tubes again. So you'll have to train them each time. The connector wire between them hangs a little bit low for vehicles. I've got a slide showing how we're trying to figure out a fix for that. Unlike metal, the stakes break and they can't be bent back into shape. With broken fiberglass, it's just terrible to work with, even worse than like barbed wire. So that is a pain in the butt. Bushy plants don't lend themselves to a tall, skinny shape. They may not be compatible with your post puller, and ultimately they are a disposable product. I'd like to get away from disposable stuff because trees do grow themselves. I have a SARE project. You can look it up there by that number if you're interested. And that project is seeking to reduce our maintenance inputs, use renewable resources from the farm to deter browsing. So that's like brush as well as non-palatable plants, and to try and kind of cooperate with natural succession. So that's just in progress right now, and I'll have my final report next summer if you're interested in hearing back on that. So in terms of the height, I did want to say this is kind of an exciting new thing. I needed to be able to drive vehicles. In particular, I needed to be able to drive some mobile chicken sleds underneath this wire, and it wouldn't fit. So the wire is about this high right now. So like if I want to drive through it in my truck, I just kind of lift it up and over the antenna, and it's fine, but we couldn't get the chicken sleds under it. So I reached out to Plantra and I showed them what I was doing, which was zip tying 2 stakes together. And they were like, oh, try this. And they have a coupler, and I have another show and tell here. I don't know if you guys can see this. Can you all see this? Does it show up? I don't know.
Hold it just a little closer.
I cannot see myself for some reason.
Yep. No.
Oh, there it is. Yeah. Yep. So they were like, hey, we already have this little booger. And so I was like, cool. And we stuck those on, and then a 3-foot stake. And now I've got the wire up high. So not only can I drive my truck, but the cattle can very easily move underneath this. They don't have to be scared or anything if they're, if it's hanging a little bit low. And our herdsmen, when they're on their ATVs, can easily go under without having to move it out of their way. And that just basically makes it easier to operate in that field as cattle farmers without this like kind of thing that will slow you down. So that just makes it a little bit more, what's the word that I'm looking for? We can use it in more spaces that way. So that's everything that I've got. I think we've got a link somewhere that I can talk more about, but I am working on this year creating a Southeastern Agroforestry network. If you're interested in that, there's my email on the screen. Also have a website. It's somewhat bereft and needs a little TLC, so I would just use the email if I were you. But definitely working on trying to get some more peer-to-peer networking. So that's all I've got, and hopefully I didn't take too long. Emily, how'd I do?
You did wonderfully. And Stesha is putting the link in the chat right now to that Google form. Do you want to say a little bit more about that network, just like who might be interested in filling out that form?
Sure. So our initial thing, and I think I probably sent it to some of the folks that I recognize and the participants. Initially, so there's a couple different ways that it could go, and I'm actually going over to Europe this summer to look at some of the agroforestry networks that they have, and it can either be more of a producer to institution type of network, platform for that type of discussion, or it can be more of a peer-to-peer producer network. And there's benefits of and drawbacks of both. And I suppose some networks probably attempt to do both. I'm not exactly sure what our community needs most. And so this initial interest meeting, if you want to sign up now, I would just put you into a mailing list to attend an interest meeting. I'm hoping to get that to happen by the end of April. And that would basically be just, hey, this is what we need. This is what we need. And trying to figure out which route should we go. And so there's been a lot of interest in that so far. So I'm really excited for that to happen. And if whether you don't have to be in the Southeast, if you just kind of want to like join in and say, hey, I think this is the type of thing that we need. I think it'll be a platform for other institutions to hear stuff. So I'm excited about that.
Excellent. All right. So let me adjust the view. So I'm going to start my video again. And let's go to gallery view. We should be side by side. There we go. All right. So we're going to go into the curated Q&A in a minute, where I will sort of be like the voice of the people, of those who have submitted questions ahead of time, which really we got quite a few questions. So thank you for all who participated in that. But first, we're going to do a 3-question quickfire round. That may or may not be related to what we're talking about today. So you have 10 seconds to answer each of these questions. Ooh. First off, what is your favorite farm tool?
I tend to want to say something really annoying like time or patience, but I did have someone compliment my pruners the other day, and I told him if the pruners were a man, I'd marry him. So probably a good pair of pruners, yeah.
Ooh, nice. What kind of pruners do you go with?
Still.
Nice.
Yeah.
What's your least favorite farm tool?
Barbed wire.
Yeah. And do you have any secret talents?
Yeah, I do. If I turn the lights off, I can stick a flashlight in my mouth and light comes out my nose.
I am so glad that I asked.
That's my secret talent. Thanks for now. The world knows that.
You're very welcome. All right. So we are going to move into these prepared questions. So they're kind of batched. We curated a little bit and put them into batches. So first batch is upcoming projects. What are your upcoming projects, Wyn?
So the main thing this year is working on that network as I mentioned, and just trying to really figure out what the gaps are and where we what direction we need to go. But then I'm also, as I mentioned, I'm traveling to the EU for 3 months or so to focus on agroforestry models, some grazing management stuff that they do, agricultural co-ops as well, and in particular agricultural co-ops that share equipment and machinery, and then also looking at their agroforestry networks. I'm not sure if I mentioned that, and a little bit interested in carbon credits as well, because it seems that they've been a little bit more successful at integrating carbon credits into those rural economies. So I'm very excited about that. And if you're interested in hearing more, I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to. I think I'm just going to send emails to people, because I'm not great on social media, or maybe I'll figure it out before then. But if you want to keep updated on that, you can always just email me and I'll add you to a mailing list.
Nice. All right. So, all right, designing for non-ruminants and alternate methods of protection. So first off, since we're still near to tree tubes, what tube heights do you recommend for different kinds of animals?
So I would defer first off to the Plantra website. So they include that, all their different heights. And I would say if you have a particular breed of cattle where you're like, well, this is a little bit of a shorter cow, can I use the ones for sheep? I would totally call Plantra and just ask, because if they don't know, they'll figure it out for you. They're absolutely fantastic to work with. For me, I can't answer that question well. I'm sure that there are other people, are other presenters in this series, as well as people that are here who will probably know better than me. For me, because cattle are everywhere, they're like kind of the lowest common denominator, so to speak. So everything has to be up to par of standards. So everything has to be at least 6 feet. I would say off the top of my head, our sheep would probably do with 5 feet, our pigs with 4, and our chickens with 3. I mean, chickens will kind of jump, bite the leaves off. So roughly, yeah.
Well, and I think it's worth thinking about what else is in your system too. Like if you've got deer, you got to at least go with like goat height, whatever they recommend for goat height.
Yeah, I get a lot of people ask me about deer protection, and I'm just like, man, I have bigger mouths to have to protect from, so I don't know a thing about deer protection, really.
All right, so what about okay, so this question reads, tree tubes can't be used for all species. Do you find electric wire or netting effective in protecting trees and shrubs in animal systems? And if so, do you have thoughts on like setup?
Yeah. So we do actually, our as I think I mentioned before, our most dire need for shade is actually in our hog and our poultry operations. But those are only on about 10 to 20 acres of the farm. The remainder of the farm is all ruminants, so that's why I focused on ruminants. But so for pigs and chickens, pigs are their whole own animal. You have to know the pigs, and right now we've kind of seen a lot of different pig protection methods, but I haven't seen anything right now. That we have some kind of like prototypes, but I can't tell you exactly what we're going to use for our pigs. I just know that we want shade down there fast. For our chickens, we also want shade. And, for chickens, you could really, if you had a big enough bare root tree, you could just plant the tree and not do any protection. But I think the main question is like about these alternative methods of protection. So like I said, I've used other tubes, and for other people, I know that other people have used other tubes and had some success. I know that people have used Plantra tubes without energizing them and had success. I know that for our sheep, I could just throw the tube out there. I could throw a 5-foot tube out there with its stake and no electricity, and it would be fine from the sheep. But I have to protect from cattle. So, if you just had another animal, you could certainly do less. But in terms of moving from a tube to like a wire or netting, okay, so I have seen silvopasture where there's just like a wire between this is pretty common. You just fence the animals off the area. Okay. And I started by doing that because I was like, I don't want to have fence around the trees. What a pain in the butt. Well, what happens for us, our weed pressure is so much that as soon as you remove the animals, you get weeds. So we have to keep them grazing right up to it. We also don't want to give up that pasture, not that it's like really that much. But that just goes against the grain. We don't want to be taking land out of production. So in terms of like, I have seen it work where you just have a one wire and the tree. So say you have a 6-foot gap and then your bare root tree in the middle of it. And there's like 3 feet on each side with an electric wire. For some animal herds and for some places, that will work. And absolutely more power to you. If you can make that work, go for it. For me, I cannot mow. That's not an option. And I also can't just have a like little dinky wire. I've got to deal with like quite a bit of grazing density. And as far as netting, I'm guessing that we're talking about, I don't know whether we're talking about poly netting there or some sort of like other, like the bird netting type of stuff.
I'm guessing poly netting.
I guess it could be when we're thinking of like deer protection. I guess I think over, like chestnut trees and stuff, they might wrap some bird netting. So maybe either one. I've never used bird netting professionally. I use it in my yard. Poly netting would be a very expensive way to do trees unless you just had a few. Poly netting is a whole bunch of poly wire. And it doesn't stay super hot either because it grounds out. And it's a real pain in the butt to have to move around. It's meant to be a temporary solution. So I'm sure that someone has used it to great effect somewhere, but it's probably not a route that I would tend to want to go.
Yeah, I can share that we have used that as a method in our setting. We just run polywire fence around our trees, and then it moves with the animals, but we're not managing nearly the size of space that Wyn is. So I think that's really a scale question for sure. But what about, commentary on metal cages?
Oh yeah, so the metal, I think that someone has sold them under the moniker arbor shields. I call them wrist rippers. They're like a 12 gauge wire that's like turned on angle and then cut at a 45 degree angle. And they rip my arms up really, really well. But the cattle can still knock them over and the trees just grow out the sides. And then you're like having to get your hands you can't wear gloves because you can't operate with your little pruners and your little tiny things with leather gloves on. So your bare hands are like messing around in this like really sharp, nasty wire. It's terrible. I hate them. Now I have a bunch that I bought and they're kind of hard to get rid of once you buy them. What I am planning on using them for, there's a couple places where I use those. If I have a wooded area that I want to graze and I can't energize stuff because it's just in the woods, I will put one of those around. If there's like a tree in the woods that I want to protect, I'll put one of those around it. And then also for areas that for some reason I can't protect and I'm using a tube, I'll use the tube inside of the arbor shield, and that actually will work, because when they try to rub on the tube, they want to try to rub on the tube, then they want to try to walk over the tube, over the stake, the fiberglass stake, and then rub their bellies on it like that, so it breaks it off at the ground. And then they also want to lick the tube up. They want to lick the tube up the stake and then pull it off and then eat whatever's under there. So those are kind of the ways that they do that damage. So if you have the electric wire on them, that kind of keeps them from doing that. And if you have that shield, that arbor shield coming up from the bottom, that metal cage that will also keep them from doing that.
Got it. Have you worked at all with the like the Vistapore mats or any of like the weed protection mats that some people are into?
No, because those whenever it comes to like maintenance of stuff, my motto is like opposite of Nike, like just don't do it. Like whatever you're supposed to do, try your best to just not do it. Like see, because trees, the thing is like trees grow on their own. So let's figure out what they need to be able to do this on their own. And that's kind of where I'm coming from with, I'm saying cattle eat grass, right? Let's use that to the greatest effect possible and only have an area this size that we're keeping them from grazing. So similarly with those weed mats, I don't put down weed mats. I do use a little bit of mulch just to keep, so I don't have like a drawing or anything of this, but so you've got your tube that comes down on the ground about like this, and you've got your like plants, and you've got your soil that's been disturbed right around your digging hole. And those plants will try to come up, and if one gets underneath the tube, it will start growing as tall and high as the tree will, because again, it's that microclimate. So just to keep those plants from coming in there, I plant the tree, and then I actually wait a little while until the weed seed, like if I'm planting in February, I'll wait until now or May until the weed seed has germinated from that disturbed soil, and then I'll put mulch on it. And instead of mulch, I just use wood chips because we have a limitless supply of wood chips. They just drop them off at our farm.
Nice.
I'll just put enough around there to where it basically just helps keep the plants from going up under the tube.
Awesome.
But yeah, I mean, having to use a weed mat or something, that's just going to like kill on your cost. It just kills, you know?
Yeah. And even if you're getting them cheap, the labor cost is going to be just so high.
Well, and the cattle will just pull them off. When I started, I was like, put a little cardboard collar around them. The cattle are just like, this is a cool toy. They just pulled them off. You know?
Sure.
So,
yeah. Novelty. I love the novelty.
Yeah.
All right. So trees for fodder or like additional income streams. Let's start with fodder. Are you managing any fodder trees right now?
So I have the two trees that I'm most interested right now in for fodder are mulberry and Lombardy poplar. And I am propagating those right now. And we know that the cattle do eat them. My big issue with creating them for fodder is I don't need to know whether or not the cattle eat them. And I don't need to know whether or not like we want them. Yeah, we want them. We would love to be able to have lots and lots of those trees, mulberry in particular, because of the protein. But Lombardy in particular. My issue is, again, I don't have 10 cows. You know, I've got hundreds of animals. And so one of the things I'm hoping to find when I go to Europe is somebody who started mechanizing tree hay. Because if we can't mechanize it, honestly, I mean, I know that like doesn't go with the vibe of small farmer. Like to be a small farmer, I'm supposed to be like picking up leaves one at a time and feeding them to cows. But I mean, we have people raising their huge families on this farm. So if we can't mechanize it the way that we do hay, then I don't know how we can offset some of our nutritional issues. Now for holistic health and just getting them some like plants that are, have interesting compounds in them that are going to be good for their bellies and their health, or, natural wormers or whatever. Yeah, we can feed them a little bit of that type of woody plant material. But in order to actually put a dent in the 2 times a year where we have nutritional issues, we're going to need a lot. I mean, we have decreased our hay consumption by 80% over 20 years, but we still do a bale per animal every year right now. I said, it reduced by 80%. So,
and how many animals do you have? In a given year?
I would say, so we usually, I always get these numbers a little bit off, somewhere between 400 and 500. Usually. Yeah. So I'm not quite a bale for each of those because some of them are calves, but it'd be a lot, so we got to figure out how to do it like farmers. And so that's where I'm at on the fodder issue. I'm very, very interested in it, especially because there's some, I think, preliminary research showing additional tannins in the diet can help reduce methane emissions, but it doesn't make any difference if we can't feed it to them at scale. So that's what I'm really interested in right now. If anybody's heard anything about that, please send me links.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, hopefully you'll find something in Europe when you go.
I hope so. I'm putting
You're
all my
definitely
bets
leading
on.
the
I'll find all
charge.
the solutions over there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen some interesting stuff about like pelletizing it, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And so are you managing trees? Are you managing any trees for timber products?
So currently, no. Just like a lot of the other landowners, you know, our land is just all hills, and so our woodlots are very small, and there's never been an incentive for us to really learn about woodlot management. So I don't know very much about that. I'm very much a novice, but I'm slowly trying to gain some knowledge. And I hope now that I know how to plant trees and I'm learning more about trees, I can definitely imagine some of those grids that I showed going forward having a timber outcome.
What about non-timber forest products? Do you have any orchard trees, any fruit production, anything like that?
No, the only things like that right now are stuff that we would be interested in growing for the animals themselves. In terms of new income streams from like fruit and nut, to me, that's just a whole nother production enterprise, you know, and I like to do odd stuff with my time. I don't actually like to be a legitimate farmer. So we'd have to hire someone who wanted to say, you know, grow and sell persimmons or something like that. And when we get that person, yeah, maybe I should start growing trees so that when we get that person, we'll have the persimmons.
Nice. All right. Our next batch of question is planting layouts. So I know this is tough because these questions really need context for you to be able to answer them, but I'll give you a stab anyway. So in general, how far apart should I plant trees?
Yeah, so I actually have some other slides to show with it. I mean, in a nutshell, I will say it depends, which is like not very surprising, but I can show how we do, but I will have to do a screen share again.
Yeah, go for it. Please.
So let me see if I can find that. Okay, so I think we saw this slide before. Basically in this grid, I have these kind of 3 different types of trees. So I use so many different species. People say, well, what species are you using? Because I'm not particularly interested in timber or non-timber products right now. I'm just like, well, let's use a lot of different trees and see how they do and enjoy the biodiversity and et cetera, et cetera. So I kind of roughly divide those many different trees into 3 categories just to make it a little bit easier for me to lay things out. Now, the tree people in the group will look at this list and go, hey, black locust isn't weak wooded. And, you know, they'll go, hey, you know, persimmon gets really big and blah, blah, blah. So don't focus too much on what is in each of those 3. That's not what's really important. It's just that it's a tool that I use to create these layouts. And the really important thing is your big and slow trees, the ones that are going to be here when I'm long gone, I just really need to figure out what spacing those are at and then intersperse the other ones in between that. So in general, the idea is that you've got these trees with different diameter canopies. I should have put canopy. It's not a diameter breast height. So just roughly these different diameter canopy sizes. And of course, black locust is bigger than that. But again, don't worry too much on that. Those categories, you could come up with your own and break those down into more detail as you were looking at particular species. But I'm just trying to kind of illustrate how I do this phased planting. So the idea is that you start out with a lot of trees because you don't have a lot. Those slow growing trees aren't going to provide shade for a long time. So you have things like the Lombardy poplar and the mulberry that are going to, and redbud that are going to provide shade really fast. And then over time, you kind of either cut those and remove them or coppice them. And you end up with, you know, when I'm dead and gone, hopefully there's lots of oaks and hickories there. I don't know, you know, call up the farm in 100 years and see how well my idea worked. But certainly I'm not the first person to have this idea. This phased planting is, you know, something that foresters do elsewhere. And they also do it for tree training. Although I would say, like, I'm kind of doing this a little bit loosey-goosey again in these grids because I'm not particularly looking at timber. If I was to start looking at timber, say that I wanted to do a walnut grove or something somewhere, or pines, I would consult with a forester very carefully to make sure that I got that layout perfect so that my timber outputs were as good as possible, because what I'm describing is really just still for getting these shade trees. And down here at the bottom, these numbers that I have, where am I? where my mouse is. My mouse disappeared. Those numbers that I have are like, sorry, mouse disappeared.
The numbers in the table.
There we go. Okay. I'm like, I couldn't find my mouse. So roughly they'll come out to around this kind of area. And this is roughly the kind of spacing that I use. And then this column is for animal units provisioned of shade. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, an animal unit, at least in the US, is 1,000 pounds of animal. So that might be a small cow or 4 sheep or something like that. If you imagine like a 10 to 15 foot diameter, say redbud or young mulberry or something, you could fit 7 or 8 animals underneath that, but they're going to be kind of panting and hot. And if you really had enough space, you'd rather there be fewer. So I kind of put an engineering factor, so to speak, in here with some buffer room, so that there would be either the ability for them to kind of space out underneath the tree, or for them to double up if I ended up with a much bigger herd than I thought in these paddocks. So this is around comes out to around 40 square feet per animal, so like a 4x10 space per an animal. So if it's really hot, they'd certainly appreciate that. And then you get your spacing, your rough spacing. Again, you can narrow all these ranges down to something specific if you're going with a particular species. But for me, for instance, I was going with a mixture of oaks and hickories. And so I just wanted to be able to kind of set those oaks and hickories out there and then be able to put other stuff in between and just keep myself sane. So that is how I think about layout.
Excellent. That's great. And I love that you're planning like generations ahead. And I mean, I suppose it seems like your farm's that's an appropriate thing to do. It's for everybody, but your farm makes it easy because you're, 5th generation farmer, and it's kind of baked in, which is cool.
Yeah, but I think that the other thing is, if I didn't do that dense planting, it's really important for like my herdsman who's like, he's getting paid this year, he wants the shade. He's getting annoyed by the trees in his way this year, and he's getting paid by his, so he wants it to be fast. So that's why I want to put in those fast growing trees as well, so we can show some benefit to him.
Definitely. Yeah, I love the diversity. That's great. So let's see. How many trees per acre or animals should I plant? I mean, you touched in on that with densities. I think that we can move past that one for now, unless you want to say more about it.
That's a little bit separate of a question. I was referring to how many animals would fit, like I would assume would fit underneath a tree's shade comfortably. Trees per acre is a very tricky situation because it depends upon your paddock layout, how many animals you have, your grazing density that you want. In general, over the areas that I looked at of our farmer, I was like, roughly, I think these fields it was about 120 acres or so. And I wanted to do about, it was basically like 100, am I getting this right? It came out to about 10 trees per acre. Now, over time, those would get thinned, right? Because that includes those A, B, and C trees. But that doesn't mean that every acre has 10 trees on it. That means in a 4-acre field, I have a stretch of trees. I have a grid of trees that is 40, that has 40 trees in it or something.
Yeah, like a big swath.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, and I think questions like that too, it's like it's going to require research and, intense contextualizing to figure out how many trees per acre or per animal was the second part of that question, trees per animal.
Yeah, and also now that I think about it, I'm not even sure. I tend to get numbers wrong when I'm not looking at them written down. So if if you guys are doing math in your head and you're like, when that doesn't make sense, I probably am just wrong.
All right. We're going to keep moving because we've got a few more and I want to make sure we have the live Q&A time. So you talked about tree species that you use and why. Oh, what trees have you found to be the most livestock resistant? And we're breaking this into 2 categories. So one being like the least palatable, like they're the least likely to graze because they just don't want it. And then also what's the least resistant to grazing? Like, what has the good bounce back factor?
Yeah, so that's I will have to be annoying in my answer to this question, which is like, those are not the right questions to be answered. If you're growing trees and your cattle are eating them, you should be wanting them to eat them. If you don't want them to eat them, they shouldn't be eating them. That shouldn't be the issue. For the trees that you're growing and they're palatable trees and you want your animals to eat them, or say that they're less palatable, but you still want your animals to eat a little bit of them, you need to manage that way. You don't just have those cattle doing the wrong thing. And if in terms of like resistant to, again, if you don't want your cattle to be eating your trees, you shouldn't let your cattle eat your trees. You need to figure out your protection mechanism. That said, when I designed my SARE project, I had 4 species that I was using and I wanted them to get browse. So I'm putting the cattle in expecting them to get browse because I'm testing out these different deterrents. And those 4 species were mulberry and Lombardy poplar were the palatable species. Those have low toxins in them. And then persimmon and pine were the less palatable ones. And I don't know that those are particularly toxic, but just bitter. But they still will eat them. They'll still go by and eat them. I mean, they'll eat anything once. But I think that's the way. Is like I would throw it back at whoever I was talking to and say, what are your goals for your tree? Do you want them eating them or do you not? And if you want them eating them, let's make sure they're eating them. And if you don't want them eating them, let's make sure they're not.
Yep.
Because a cow will try the top of any tree, tree.
Yes, I think there's a lot of information about like Silvix and things being deer resistant or browse resistant, and most animals seem like they'll at least sample something once. So yeah. I always caution against leaning too much into what you've read about things being resistant.
Absolutely.
So have you found any tree animal combinations to be like particularly effective? Or are there any combinations that you would recommend against?
So far everything that we're doing with the cattle and sheep and chickens are effective. I think pigs are just a little bit harder because they like to dig things up. I will say, I have a couple notes here. For chickens need shrubs. Chickens are like wild jungle animals. They need to be underneath a shrub. That's when they're happiest and they can like, dust bathe and everything and just chill out. And that shrub keeps the aerial predators from getting them. If I was to just put like a bunch of persimmon trees or something with these big branches in a chicken field, that's just a place for hawks to sit, but no place for the chickens. So I use a lot more shrubs and thicket forming stuff for the birds. And those are also going to house like little insects that they can eat, down at their height. I wouldn't put silver maples or other weak wooded trees right over a fence, or at least I wouldn't let them mature over a fence because they'll just drop on the fence. Legumes, a lot of different legume stuff can be toxic. Kentucky coffee tree seeds, for instance. I know that cattle have died drinking water from a pond that had seeds fall in it.
Oh, wow.
But there's a lot of just legumes that you don't want them to like overbrowse, so I would be careful of that. At the same time, the Elizondo or whatever the guy's name is who is doing the Leucana down in Florida or Brazil or wherever, they're eating legumes. So some legumes are not as toxic, but that's something to watch out for. Cedar trees, even when you prune them up, there's too dense of shade. So I've used cedar trees as like screening trees, but I wouldn't use them as primarily as like silvopasture trees. And then honey locust pods. For us, we don't have a need for that nutrition from the honey locust pods. And I would be more concerned about seedlings coming up and having to bush hog them. So for me, I'd be really careful planting honey locust trees if I couldn't bush hog underneath them. And I would just want to make sure that I was bush hogging while everything was small. And I didn't have, we cleared out some honey locusts last year and messed up a tractor tire. And fixing a tractor tire is like several $100s. So that's something that I would just think about how I was going to bush hog any of the new trees, assuming that you put in thornless trees, right? And then if the new trees coming up and they're not thornless, you want to get those before they get large enough to create a problem.
All right, a few maintenance questions before we go to the open Q&A. At what age do you typically remove the trees, and how do you know that the trees are ready?
I'm assuming you meant, do I remove the tubes?
Sorry, yes, the tubes, not the trees.
Yeah. So, well, the tubes are supposed to last 6 years. I think some of these trees are going to be ready to remove like within 3 years, and some will probably would probably do better if there was protection later on. You know, for me, I have to have the tree strong enough that the cow can't walk over it. It's that belly rubbing thing. I have to make sure that she can't walk over it. So that's pretty strong. So what I plan to do is when I initially take off the tubes, because the trees are like, I'm growing, get me out of here. But their stem is still a little bit weak and she could still push it over. I'm planning on running a single line of hot wire down against the trees bark, basically, so that she just wouldn't get in there. They can still graze on either side of the hot wire, but she can't get in there and rub over it.
Excellent. All right, so these other questions have been covered. All right, so we have another lightning round of questions really quick before we go to the open. What do you never leave home without?
Those damn pruners, I guess. I don't know.
For me, it's sunglasses and a water bottle.
Huh?
I always have sunglasses and a water bottle. I thought for sure you were going to be a pocket knife girl.
I actually always forget a pocket knife. Yeah, my dad makes fun of me.
All right, last song that was stuck in your head.
I have no idea. I'm sorry, I don't have anything for that.
No, all good.
Probably a Bruce Springsteen song.
What's the first plant that you felt connected to? That you can remember?
Oh, the weirdest plant. Those little annual celosias. My first garden that my mom made just for me were like these crazy fluorescent colored celosias when I was probably 7 years old. And yeah.
I think that's sweet. I think kids, again, that's why you got to get kids in the garden.
Yeah.
And it's good to I think those annuals are such a good use of that. All right, so we are going to go to the public Q&A now. So I'll work through the open questions here. And then if anyone wants to actually like raise a hand and be unmuted and ask a question, please do. So, okay, first one was what tree spacings are you primarily working with and why? Which we covered. I don't know if you want to just like recap your typical spacing.
I think that I didn't speak specifically on spacing well enough. So typically, like for like a medium-sized tree, I would do like a 35-foot center or something like that. But what I prefer to do is have that interspace. So those oaks and hickories are on like 60-foot centers. I'm also trying some with like 90-foot centers. So that's kind of the range is like 50 to 90 feet. And it just depends on how big that crown is going to get. But then in between those, I will have more trees initially. Here's the problem. If you just started, like if you just go, I've got this section of field. So say that you've got a field that's like, a lot of ours are like 400 feet by 1,000 feet. And you're like, well, I'm just going to put one long line of trees along that 1,000 foot so they can nice and spread out. They won't spread out, right? They'll all cluster into like one tree. If the trees are too far apart, they're just going to all cluster underneath one because they're herd animals. They like to be together. So you have to put the trees close enough together to where they feel like they're still in a herd, right? But then you also want them to be far enough apart to where they can open up into their broad canopy. So that's another reason for me to put those intermediate trees that are smaller that I can take out over time.
Nice. So, okay, what types of trees are being planted and why? You already covered that. You want to talk about voles? Do you guys have vole pressure?
I know a lot of people do. We have a pretty wild and woolly situation here. If I see a vole, I see two hawks, I have not seen a single tree show signs of that type of damage. I don't know why, but I do know that we just have everywhere along the food chain. We have weasels. We saw a bobcat last year. Like all I can assume is that there's not enough voles to show up. I don't know.
Well, it's good. It's a good problem not to have.
Yeah, I'm really happy about it. My plan for voles was like castor oil. That's what I was hoping. But I haven't had any problems so far. So fingers crossed.
All right. What is the slope you're working on? And are you planting on a contour? And if so, are you worried about cold air drainage?
Let me real quickly just say something I just remembered. We did plant an orchard some years ago, and we did have some voles in that orchard, but we were like mowing the orchard. So I think that might be the difference. So the slope and the contour and the cold. Can you go over that question one more time?
Yeah. So I'll break it down. First is, what is the slope you're working on?
Okay, so we don't have anywhere that's flat really, except the top of the hill. So anywhere from, usually it's going to be somewhere, yeah, it'll be from 5 to, when it gets up like past 20, that's when I'm like, I can't run a bush hog over this. What's my plan? And that's when most of our slopes over 20% are already wooded. They're already fenced off in wood lots, maybe a little bit higher, maybe like 20, 23, 24, 25%. At that point, they're already fenced off. And so that we have two types of land around here where I live, which is field and forest. And the forest is just fenced off steep areas. And everywhere that's flat enough to bush hog is a field. So that's so all the areas that I'm planting new trees are going to be less than 20 or below 20%.
Got it. So are you planting on contour at all? Or with
Honestly,
respect to contour?
No,
yeah.
We don't. So one of the things is we have tons of moisture and tons of infiltration because of all the work that we've done at our pastures. So I don't really worry about like runoff or anything like that. So in general, the orientation of my trees matches the grazing management, like circulation, and where my fences are, where my water is, and where my animals are going to be moving back and forth, which is actually more important to me versus the slope. Because so for instance, if you had we have fields like this actually, where if you have the watering trough at the top of the hill and the shades at the bottom, they're going to run a path, and then that path will end up eroding. So we would be more concerned about those circulation things rather than planting trees on contour.
Got it. And actually that triggered for me a question that I realized I skipped over earlier about maintenance, and that maintenance in the initial years. And obviously you're managing your animals to take care of the weed pressure, but do you want to say anything about maintenance in the first couple of years in terms of like irrigation, watering, pruning, anything like that? I know you talked about going back and just checking for, like if there had been big grass explosions in the tube.
Yeah, so my basic maintenance regime, as I said, just don't do it. I check everybody twice a year. So I will check in the late spring, and I will prune when the new branches are starting to come out, just to like go ahead and nip those in the bud, like no lateral growth. And I will check anything that I planted back in February to make sure that it looks, all good. And then in the fall, I'll check again, and I will note any damage and note what needs to be added the next spring, and then I'll plant in the spring. And that's, at this point, I used to have all kinds of maintenance that I did. At this point, that is all that I'm doing, because that's what keeps me cost effective. If we have usually somewhere between 48 and 55 inches of rain a year, if our trees can't manage that, they don't make it. If I have that's why I talked about, when I was talking about my survival, I said in a good year, if I have a bad year, like 2016, 17, trees are just going to die. I can't go out and water all those trees. It's just not, it's not realistic, and it wouldn't be cost effective. But if we have good years, which we usually do, I get everybody planted in February, give them a little water, then we get our spring rains, and they're fine.
So I'm imagining you going out with your pruners around your like wrapped up tubes, and how easy is that to do you just slide it up and go to town?
Yeah, well, I heard a little tip from Austin with trees for grazers, and I didn't understand what he was saying at first, and then he's the one that turned me on to these tubes. So thank you, Austin. The very top fastener, I fasten the fastener to the tube, but not the stake. And that makes it really a lot quicker to pull the tube up. and do your pruning. And I kind of like let it sit on my arm or my shoulder or my head or ball cap while I'm doing the pruning, and then pull it back down. And it's quite fast, actually. Yeah.
Excellent.
And then another really nice thing about it is I try to do it in, like, when I'm going around, if I'm just driving by and kind of checking them, I'll do it in the evening when the sun's at an angle, and the sun shining through will show me what's inside the tube. So if there's like a weed that's grown up inside, I can just look through and say, oh, that one's, I got to go clean that one out. Yeah.
Nice.
It's so minimal, though, that I cannot express how minimal the maintenance is compared to any other alternative.
I was impressed by all your numbers on survivability and like your cost per tree. Are you doing anything specific in terms of keeping track of that? Like any specific system that you can recommend to people, or
I
like
wish
using an app, or are you just like, you've got a notepad in the field?
No, I'm a spreadsheet girl. So I've just gotten really well. I mean, we keep up with all our receipts, and all of my costs go through their own, thing in our accounting. So it goes through like QuickBooks in one category. But for me, myself, I just keep all of my receipts, and I keep all my labor hours and all my hired labor hours, and I just put it in a spreadsheet. Yeah. And then I look at the tally of the entire season at once. I don't look at, like, one of the problems that I had with a lot of the case studies is I got the sense that they would go out and say, oh, it took me, 4 hours to do this many trees, so it's this many hours per tree. And I was like, that's not the labor cost that I care about. The labor that I care about is, what is your paycheck going to be, right? So when you had to go get gas, I'm still paying for that. When you're sitting around smoking a cigarette, I'm still paying for that. So I tell people not to smoke when they're on the job. It's like, I try to make sure that my workers are engaged in being productive during that time. And then it's how much I pay them. That's how much I paid on labor. And it's the whole shebang. And so I look at that over the entire season.
Nice. All right. From Alec in Tennessee, any good resources on how shade trees affect pasture and animal production in the Southeast?
Yeah, so I think Alex should come back for John Fike's presentation
next Tuesday.
So, yeah, next Tuesday. So we were just talking about this before we started, which is there are my good resource is going to be John Fike. And other stuff they've done at Virginia Tech and elsewhere. So there is some interesting research out there. This is my impression of the research, and I'm fine for people to tell me I'm wrong on this if they disagree. But it appears to me that we have a lot of studies that show a measurement that could potentially be considered positive result, and then other ones there's like, oh, that's not so good. And it's kind of it doesn't, to me, I haven't really seen, what do they call it, like a meta-analysis or a summary of that research that is in-depth enough for me to be able to go, yeah, overall it's compatible. The fact of the matter is, I know as a producer, there's so many photons coming down from the sun, and any that's hitting the tree isn't going to hit the grass below. That being said, we've got plenty of trees with lots of grass growing underneath them. And one of the things to consider is it's not just like how much biomass is growing at ground level. It's also the digestibility. So one of the things that I'm interested in is like in the spring, our digestibility starts to taper off as it gets hotter, but we know that underneath the shade, that digestibility stays high. So even though the cows are eating the same amount, if it's more digestible, I suppose somebody else can correct me if I'm wrong, but I suppose that means they're able to, keep a higher weight gain. So that's what I would direct Alec to someone who's more knowledgeable than me about that.
Yeah, I think Fike's going to be a great resource for that. So I hope that you'll tune in. And I know that there's some good information particularly on heat stress and like weight outcomes. Like that's the most like quantitative things I've seen is like relating heat stress versus less heat stress and, relating those to weight outcomes. And a question from Mark, sounds like your soils are deep enough and healthy enough where you don't normally have droughty periods during the summer. Is that right?
So I'll answer that in two ways. Number one, yeah, our soil is hot stuff, Mark. You need to come check it out. Our soils are awesome. They're wonderful. I have seen in my lifetime our farm change from an area that had been farmed for tobacco to an area that has regenerative grazing, and it's like such a world of difference. And it affects the stream flow actually. But I will say, as much as you can do to your soil to improve it, there's still like a baseline of like what is of the climate and the soils. And so we do have droughts, but they're less years than not. So they're few enough years that I would rather run the risk of. Well, let me put it to you this way. In order to get NRCS funding for irrigation, I think I have to have watered for like 2 out of 5 or 3 out of 5 of the past years. And I never, we never water anything. So it's not a big enough of an issue to drive my strategy. Now, when I've done these webinars before, it's like a lot of people don't have that luxury, right? And in that case, I don't know what to tell you. I suppose using some of the permaculture techniques to where you would bring more trees to your water naturally, using more drought tolerant trees and or getting irrigation or having a watering plan, would be some of the things that people do. But for me, it makes more sense just to kind of pray,
Awesome. All right, that is the end of our big Q&A, but I have one final question that I'll ask. This stuck out to me in a conversation that we had before this session. And you said, trees are good for me because they slow me down. And I just wanted to ask you to share about that a little bit, because everyone's always saying, I had a thought about that, and everyone's always saying the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the next best time is yesterday. But yeah. I think it puts so much pressure on people too. I think it's okay to stop and wait and plan your spacing, I think that you're a very both thoughtful and analytical person, and I would just love to hear what you hear you say a little more about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, anyone who's ever grown a tree has had to wait on the tree, right? So I don't think there should be any pressure. I mean, I love to watch bonsai videos of little old Japanese ladies, and they say trees accumulate time, and I love that. There's something about it that when it slows you down and it brings you into it's like some of the trees right now that we have around our headquarters, I'm training the branches down. They're very slow growing trees, but I'm like, in 50 years, this is going to be a great climbing tree. I know, because I used to climb trees, and that really takes you out of the hustle and bustle and reconnects you with the kind of big time and big universe. So yeah, I think there's something very rewarding, personally rewarding on that level. But I think probably when I said that, I just meant I do so many different things. I'm always wanting to do this or that or this or that, and growing other stuff like perennials and grasses and stuff. It's, each season there's new stuff going on. Are we going to burn? Are we going to spray? Are we going to do this or that? And with trees, it's like, well, better get ready to plant this year, and it's like they require this kind of a little bit of monotony and patience. And I think that's really good and centering for me personally.
Nice. Well, with that, thank you so much, Wyn, for being here and for being our kickoff presenter. You've done just swimmingly, and I really enjoyed the session. And there's been some nice commentary in the chat. Wanted to pull one of these up.
Well, and I
some nice thank yous. She's a total badass. Thank y'all so much.
Oh, thank you. Well, I want to say one thing before you guys go. I don't know why I'm doing peace sign, but please contact me. Sign up through that form if you want to learn more. So I'm hoping I can speak to some of you guys in person eventually.
Yeah, Stesha, would you drop that form link back in the chat just one more time? This is for the Southeastern Network that Wyn's putting together. And then also, Wyn, do you want to drop your website in the chat quick, just so that folks can check you out a little more?
Sure, although please don't go there.
Oh, come on.
It really needs a recap. But anyway, nope, that's my email.
We will be following up with links too. The recording is not going to be sent out because it's going to be posted to our YouTube. So check out the YouTube and subscribe there to get all the webinar access. And yeah, we'll send out links in a follow-up email. But thank you, everybody, and have a lovely evening. We appreciate you, and we hope to see you at our next webinar or one of our future webinars.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye.